from where you left off?
We arrived, as I later found out, Auschwitz I, which they called the famous extermination camp. At that time, I didn't know it. We came out, we had to assemble. There were guards and officers, and in particular one walked with a stick, had gloves on his hands, shiny boots, and we didn't know what was going on. It was chaos. We stood at attention. My friend Lupka, the one that I helped in the other camps and that helped me later, he had something wrong with his finger. He had injured his finger and he had bandaged. So he was a nervy little guy. He ran up to the officer in charge and spoke in German. He said, "Look, I can't, work. I have an injury." He said, "Okay, over there." He didn't know where he was going. He sent him right to the line to be exterminated. Then he walked along each line of the people that stood at attention, looked everybody in the eye. I stood there erect, with my chest out, and he, with the stick, pointed, didn't say a word. One to the left, one to the right, came to me. He pointed at me. I don't remember whether it was left or right, but I was elected to go to a labor camp instead of being exterminated. That same afternoon, I was loaded on a truck, and in a short while, maybe half an hour or so, we arrived late in the afternoon, and from a distance, we heard music. He said, "What is that?" As we came near, we saw groups of people marching from one side of the road into the camp. And when we got to the gate, we saw a group, a band of maybe 50 musicians playing marching music. And the people were marching to the music into the camp. And we thought, what is this? We are being greeted with music. We didn't know. Well, when we got into the camp, we were assigned to, they had barracks and they had big tents, several big tents set up, a huge camp. And I was assigned to tent number 1. Then we found out that we weren't greeted with music, that they do this every morning and every night when we go out to work and when we come in from work. They had a band playing to marching music, and we had to march with the music in step. And as we walked in, as we walked out, we were counted, each group of people. When we walked in, they counted us.
What was your Auschwitz number?
My Auschwitz number?
Yeah.
142436. In that camp, and that was called Auschwitz II. It was a labor camp. There were about 12,000 people in that camp. That's what I was told. Well, many, many, many barracks. And across from the camp was a huge a complex of factories. A big industrial park, many square miles. And that industrial park was also encircled with barbed wire, as was the camp, Auschwitz II. And each company also that had contracts with the government to do work used the slave labor from that concentration camp. That wasn't called a slave labor camp anymore. It was called a concentration camp. And each company, depending on the size and the amount of work, selected 10 or 15 or 200 people to work for them. So there were groups of people, with each group having one, or the larger groups having two capos in charge of the people, marching them out each morning to the workplace and to the work site. Everybody knew where to go already. And we did digging ditches, hauling cement, unloading cement, unloading tar paper, doing electrical work, doing some welding, pipe fitting, all those sort of things, all different industries. And that was our Buna, they call it Buna Works. When I came into that camp, I met later on Pinkus Kalb, the same fellow, the same neighbor that I grew up with, that I left Lodz. I found him in Auschwitz. In the other camps, through my friend who was the cook, I became friendly with the man whom the cook helped. He gave him food, and I became friendly with him. When we came in the concentration camp, that man turned out had a brother in that camp who was a black elderster, one of the people that ran one of the barracks. In that case, he was the tent elderster. So I was in that tent, and that man needed a valet to shine shoes and clean his room that he had partitioned off in the tent. So that man from the slave labor camp that knew me recommended me to his brother. So again, I was lucky. I had some extra food. It turned out that my luck stayed with me. I worked hard. The first few months, I worked at the railroad station, unloading tar paper and cement bags. I was a very hard worker. Also the food, extra food helped me. So the capo liked me because I accomplished a lot. So he put me in charge of a group of the people. And amongst them was a French gentleman, French Jew, an elder man. And that man was very weak. He couldn't work. And I was in charge of a group of 10 people. Many days I used to send him into the hut in a barrack where the supply was, to go and hide because he couldn't work. and he told me, Simon, I was a rich man in France. If we survive the war, I want you to come to France. He used to tell me about his family. I said, I'm not doing this. I'm doing it, because I feel for you. You can't work hard, so if I can, I'll do it as long as I can to make it easier for you. Then I worked for that company in that camp for a while. That one day, I was walking the street. I was transporting some cement or tar paper on a wagon with some people, and a German worker with some two laborers walked past me. Then he stopped, came back, and I recognized him, and he recognized me. That was a man, a boss, that worked for Seifert in company in Finkenherd as a pipe fitter. And I worked for him also. He used to be on the mean side. He made us work in the rain and all kind of inclement weather. He made us work. We never stopped. So he saw me. He said, what are you doing here in concentration camp? I said, what am I doing? They sent me here. He said, well, I need an experienced man to help me with the pipe fitting. I said, I can't do anything. You have to inquire in the camp. So he went into the camp and spoke to the man in charge of the labor force. I gave him my number, not my name. We had no names. All we had is numbers. And I was transferred from that other company to Seifert company to work with that German worker that I worked in Finkenherd. His name was Albert. He was a tall man. I remember I started working for him. We also had British prisoners of war that worked in that complex. They had their camps nearby. And he used to hate the British soldiers. He used to fight with them all the time. And for some unknown reason, he became nice to me. Many times, when there was no work, he said, go and hide someplace, I have no work. And in fact, he never in Finkenherd never gave me a piece of bread like some of the others, German workers. There he handed me some bread. I was surprised. So I was lucky. In the camp, I had a job as a valet for the camp, for the Black Ulster. I used to make tea for them. They had a little hot plate. And I used to shine their shoes, make the bed. So I got extra food. And at Seifert, from that man. So my luck, for some reason, stayed with me. And in Auschwitz, it was a big camp, so the guards didn't know you individually like they knew you in slave labor camps where there were 200, 300, or 400 people. But in Auschwitz, some people tried to escape. And I remember also one young boy, he stole a loaf of bread at work. The punishment, they had a system where they filed a report supposedly to Berlin. Then that people that committed the crime, stole a loaf of bread or tried to escape, was put in a separate unit, and he had to wait for the verdict from Berlin, supposedly. The verdict came back each time, death by hanging. So when that came back, all of the people in the camp, we had an assembly the assembly place, the field,
Courtyard.
assembly field, the assembly field, where we all assembled, and we assembled in each barrack with the black elders stand next to you. And we stayed 3 deep, So we assembled there. They had a gallows built, and the person that committed the crime was brought out, and a unit of the SS stood in front of us, maybe 10 or 20 or 25 of them, facing us with machine guns. And one of the officers read the verdict, and then they hanged the person right in front of us. We had to stay there and watch, stay there for 5 or 10 minutes, and then each unit had to march by the gallows and turn their heads right or left to wherever the gallows, and look at the person that was hanged. And that happened quite often in that camp. At one day, they hanged 3 people at one time. I remember there was one young fellow who was the valet for the prisoner. Oh, there was also a commandant from the prisoners, besides the SS commandant. There were all kind of functions there because it was a huge camp. And that young fella had a brother, and his brother tried to escape, and they caught him, and he was hanged. So the prison commandant got permission from the German commandant that that valet didn't have to be outside and watch his brother being hanged. He stayed in the barrack. They were kind enough, okay? That what was going on in concentration camp.
Auschwitz.
In Auschwitz too. I also helped my friend Pinkus. He was in mine in the same. By the way, I didn't stay too long in the tent. I was transferred, I believe, to Barrack 55 or 53, and I was valet for the barrack leader. So I was somehow privileged. So I asked the barrack leader to do me a favor and let Pinkus wash the pot that the soup was given to us at dinner time. We used to pick up from the kitchen a huge pot of soup for the people in the barrack. So after the soup was handed out, it had to be washed. So some of the soup was still left. So whoever washed it benefited from that, and that was good. They had some extra food. So I got Pincus that job. Each time I see him now, he keeps reminding me, you know, I owe you, you know, say you don't owe me anything. I also met one of my uncles in that camp, in that concentration camp. He was in the next barrack to me. I also helped him out. I was very, very fortunate, as I said before. Food was the main thing in sustaining you and keeping you going. And I had, luckily, more than most of them. So that helped me survive. Work, I did not I did not shy away from, because I wanted to. And doing hard labor and doing hard work helped me, as well as I showed the Germans that the Jews aren't what they told their people that they are, that they're lazy and swindlers, and that we are not. In Auschwitz, I was till January of 1945. And I worked with that outfit, that's Seifert and Company, and doing the pipe fitting for many industries. In January of 1945, we heard rumors that the Russians are closing in. Of course, Buna was bombed daily by the American and British while I was there. In fact, Auschwitz sustained some damage from some bombs. At night, the British Air Force bombed Buna. They destroyed factories. The next day, we went back to rebuild it. So we heard rumors that the war is going bad for the Germans. That one day we got word from the barrack elders there that we in a few days will have to leave. And that one morning we were assembled. We took whatever belongings we could with us, which was little, and we marched out of Auschwitz on a January afternoon, a bitter, cold, stormy day. And we marched, I don't know how many miles, to a town named Gleiwitz, which also had a concentration camp. That was also liquidated at that time. We stayed overnight there. On the way there, some people couldn't walk. Some were shot by the guards as they stopped to rest. When we got to Gleiwitz, I remember we went into a barrack and I stayed there that night. We slept several people on one of the bunk beds. The next day, they loaded all the people, us and Gleiwitz, at the railroad station. We were marched to the railroad station, and we were put onto open freight trains or open cattle cars. in the mid of winter. We were loaded on there. I don't remember how many people on each one, but too many. We couldn't lay down, we couldn't sit, we were like sardines, but we tried to make the best of it. And the train started to move. Luckily, I was with the barrack commandant or leader. He had taken a quilt with him, and he also had told me and allowed me to take a quilt. He had it from, I don't remember where from he got it, because I didn't have it in the concentration camp. I covered myself with blankets. And we had that, and we covered ourselves at night, and that kept us warm. We were shuttled for about 10 or 12 days and nights to Czechoslovakia, to Austria. The reason for it, because the railroad lines were jammed with German transports escaping the Russian advancing troops. So they had to shuttle us back and forth. So we went through Czechoslovakia to Austria. No food, no water. I had a cup tied to a string, and I scooped up some snow for water. That one day, the locomotive ran on the track next to us, and I had a hose with water running, and as he passed by, whoever collected a little bit got a little water. And food, whatever we had gathered prior to boarding the train. That's all we had.
Should we stop right here for a second?
Yeah.